Welcome to the Know It's Some podcast, bringing you the widest variety of conversational interviews for a well-rounded perspective on life. Because while it's true, nobody likes a know-it-all, it's also good to know it's some. Here's your host, Steve Platt.
That's right. Welcome back to the Know It's Some podcast. I'm your host, Steve Platt, and this week's guest just might have the coolest job out of all the guests that we've had on the show so far. If you like the outdoors, hiking, camping, being out in nature on this beautiful planet, you're going to love this episode because our guest this week is Jacob W. Frank, who is a former park ranger, an incredibly talented photographer, and right now he is the media specialist up at Yellowstone National Park. He has been there, done that, and seen that. He is an incredible photographer. Some of his imagery will just take your breath away. You have to follow him on Instagram. If you're listening to this and you get one thing out of this week's podcast, it's that you need to follow him on Instagram. It will enrich your feed and your life. Jake is an old friend of mine from way back at our days at the University of Florida. And I can tell you that it was really great catching up with him, but also this is one of those interviews that like ages like fine wine. The longer this interview goes, the more we get into tips for travel, the more we get into what his favorite national park is and why. We get into a lot of just incredible detail when it comes to the national park system, and he gives some tips and tricks to the listeners. So this is one of those episodes that you're going to want to listen to the whole way through because it is good from start to finish. I can't thank Jake enough for taking the time up there in Yellowstone to speak with us here on the podcast. I really hope you enjoyed as much as I did. With no further ado, please welcome this week's guest, Jacob W. Frank. Hey, Jake, how you doing? Welcome to the Know It's Some podcast.
Hey, how's it going, Steve? Thanks for having me.
I appreciate you being on here. You were one of the first people that I wanted to have on the podcast just because from the moment I started to see your work pop up on my Instagram, I was just amazed because it was all this incredible wildlife and nature photography. I was seeing like bisons up close and personal, and it was just coming through randomly on my feed. And every single time I would see one of these images, you just had to like take a moment and then just gape at it. Like it was incredible. And I had known you years before at the University of Florida, and I had no idea that you had even gone on to work in the Park Service or get into photography. So for the listeners who are unfamiliar, your work's even been featured in the Smithsonian. Going back to the beginning of this, what came first for you? Was it the interest in nature and wildlife? Was it the interest in the outdoors and national parks? Or was it an interest in photography and cameras and imagery and all that? Which one came first?
Well, so when we were going to school together, I actually was majoring in industrial engineering, and I was in my senior year, and I got run off the road on my motorcycle. And I just kind of had a come to Jesus moment where I was like, is this really what I want to do with my whole life? And so I took a semester off. Mm-hmm. And when I went back to school, I switched my major to recreation, parks, and tourism. That was like a random thing. I took a class in college, like with that same title. And there was a professor there that I just got along with really well. Mm-hmm. And I didn't even I grew up going to national parks and everything. My family, I was born in Montana and I grew up going to Yellowstone and a bunch of different national parks and traveling around in the summertime. I didn't really know, I didn't even put two and two together that you could do that as a career. And so it wasn't until I took that class and I switched my major, and then, it basically set me back a bunch because I went from it, you don't need calculus 3 and differential equations to go work in a national park necessarily. So
you haven't been using that too often.
Yeah, although there are engineering jobs in the national park. So for people that want to work in a national park that's an engineer, that is a real thing. Oh, cool. But I started taking classes, and then once I got back, to my second round of being a senior, I needed to do an internship as part of my course load,
Right.
and I had the opportunity to go work out in Grand Teton National Park during the winter of 7 and 2008. And so once I went out there and spent the whole semester out there, and that's really when I kind of made the decision that I was like, this is something I'm really interested in, and I want to pursue this as a career. And so after that internship, my professor that I took that undergrad recreation parks and tourism class convinced me to, go to grad school. So I went back to school at University of Florida and majored in that. But the interest of photography, where that came along, was when I went out, when I told my mom that I'm going out to Wyoming to live out in a national park. She's like, well, you need to take a camera. So she gave me her camera. My mom was a shutterbug when she was younger. And so she gave me her camera, and I went out, and I wasn't really like into photography, and like the way that I am now. But a lot of times I would take people on snowshoe hikes, and I would go out and just kind of explore on my own. And a lot of the things that I was seeing, like I didn't know the name of this mountain or this type of tree or whatever this bird was. And so I would just take pictures of things, and I would go back and find out like, what are the names of those things that I'm looking at? And so it was more of like a utilitarian, purpose for why I was using the camera. And then, and then over time I was like, this is a pretty fun thing, like to go out and try to take pictures. And it was just an opportunity for me to use it as a tool to help answer questions when I was doing the tours. And then also I would share, the photos with my friends and family back in Florida, because I was like in the middle of nowhere, and you weren't allowed to use social media on government computers at that time. So, so I was just kind of sending like, monthly emails to people with what's going on. And then after that, it was, I went back to grad school, and then I started working in Glacier National Park in Montana. That was the first time I'd worked, like I was a government employee, like not in an intern capacity. And from there, again, it was more like, there's tons of wildflowers. Like, what are the names of all these wildflowers? And what are the names of all the things that I'm seeing? And you'd get all these questions, because people are, when people go out into nature, they see all this stuff that's so novel to them, and they don't know what anything is. And you're the expert. And, it's like, my tactic was not to pretend that I knew what I was talking about. I'd say like, hey, I'm new too. I don't know what this is. And I'm going to take a picture, and I'll email you an answer tomorrow. And then eventually just, that kind of utilitarian tool turned into this more of like, can I get a better picture of that flower? Or can I get a better picture of that bird? And then it turned into more of like a passion and a hobby. And when you live in like beautiful places, the pictures you take, like when I look back at the photos that I took when I first started, they're terrible. But it's the places that you're in are so beautiful that everyone is like, oh my God, wow, that's a great photo.
Right.
And it's not so much that it's a great photo, it's that you're taking a picture of a really beautiful
thing. The subject matter is just overwhelmingly great. And so it'll come through regardless.
Yeah. And so also my mom is super supportive on anything that I do. So it's like my mom, she was all like, oh my God, it's so great. So so I had that kind of like positive reinforcement, like, oh, maybe this is something I can do. Like maybe I could, get into photography and start, selling postcards or selling prints or whatever sort of idea that I had.
Yeah.
But then the more national parks I started working in, I went from Glacier National Park, and then I went down to Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico. And then after Carlsbad Caverns, I went up to Denali National Park in Alaska. And every new park that I went to, I learned some new photography technique. Like when you go in Carlsbad Caverns, you're underground, so you have to learn how to do long exposure photography, like on a tripod. And I hadn't really done that before in Glacier National Park. And then because I had learned some long exposure photography and then went up to Alaska, I got into wildlife photography up there, because there's like, amazing wildlife everywhere. I had a lynx living underneath my house. I had, a grizzly bear look in my living room window when I was watching TV, and we both scared each other. You're just like amazing opportunities. But then as in the summer, the days are almost 24 hours long. Like it never really gets dark. But then as the summer started to end and you get into the fall and starts getting dark again, it was the first time that I'd ever seen the Northern Lights. And then the experience that I had from Carlsbad Caverns of long exposure photography, that started working for Northern Lights photography. And then when I left Alaska and moved to Utah and started working in the parks in that area, there's no Northern Lights, but then the Milky Way and is like the night sky in that area is really spectacular. And so I started taking pictures of the night sky. So everywhere I've gone, I've kind of like tailored a little bit or learned some new trick or tool in order to photograph the surroundings that I've been. But yeah, national parks are, my whole thing is, as I've moved around, in order, like, for people that don't work for the government, especially like the outdoors, a lot of the jobs are seasonal, which means that you're only on contract for 6 months or less. So you're constantly traveling around. You'd work for 6 months, and then the other 6 months I would just travel around to other national parks and take pictures and camp along the way and go with friends that I'd met. And so I had, in 2013, I think I did 120 days in a tent. So wow. It was, like basically, a third of the year I was out national parks on public lands, taking pictures, waking up, doing sunrises and sunsets. And I used that year as really the opportunity to kind of really build my portfolio as a photographer.
Right.
And the main goal was so that I could pitch myself as someone that, a national park would want to hire to do like media work. So in national parks, when you go, the main way that they get their information out is they have websites. And so you learn how to be a web author, but then the websites need photos. Then when you're physically in national parks, you get like newspapers, and someone has to design those newspapers, and someone has to design the maps and the waysides and all the exhibits that you see. So you get into like graphic design a little bit. And then right when I started getting into the Park Service too, social media started coming out. Mm-hmm. And, we were in college during the birth of social media. So we were kind of like steeped in it, and we understood like why it was fun and how to use it, and, how to connect national parks to people in a way that they were, how they're communicating with each other.
Right.
So it was just kind of like, it was a combination of an interest and skill sets, and, my looking, like, I'm always trying to basically fill a void or fill some vacuum. Like whenever someone would leave or there was something that needed to get done, I was always the person that would just step up and say, "Hey, I don't know how to do it, but I'll try to figure it out." And so I just, I started off taking pictures, and then because I could take pictures, people asked me, "Well, can you do graphic design?" And I'm like, "Well, I don't know. I mean, I can try." So I learned how to do graphic design, and then from there learned how to make videos. And then when you're doing a lot of websites, I got more into just, a lot of writing, content development. So every park that I've worked at has wanted me to do somewhat of a little bit of a different thing, but I would say the constant has been the media. So like photography, videography, social media. That's kind of my main core of what I've been doing for the Park Service. And it's changed a little bit here and there over time, but yeah, when you live in cool places and you're, living near a national park, and my wife and I and our now dog, like, she was a backcountry ranger for 10 years. And so on our free time, we like to go backcountry camping and go climb mountains and do whatever. And, really cool. And again, we just bring the camera with and take the pictures of the things you're doing. And it tends to be pretty cool.
Is it more of exactly what you just said, like, just taking pictures while you're out doing what you're doing, or do you ever like set out looking to take a certain photo? Like, are there ever hikes that or days that you go out like looking to get a specific shot of a specific part of a national park, or is it kind of like as you go along, I found this bird, I found this thing, want to take a photo?
Yeah. So it depends if I'm being paid. So when it's like for actual work purposes,
right.
like rarely am I sent out to take a picture of a bird or whatever. Like my job
Yeah.
is that, you know, in the next 5 years in Yellowstone National Park, there's $919 million worth of infrastructure projects that are slated to happen.
Okay.
And so my job is like, hey, we're going to redo this bridge and we're going to redo this section of road. And it's like, go out and document the current like condition of things, or to go out and take pictures of people, you know, doing some resource management. It's like documenting the work that's happening.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I'm driving from A to B, a wolf might run across the road, and I'm always ready with the camera to take a picture of that or whatever it might be. So
Pretty cool.
whenever I go out, I have some sort of like a mission, you know, that I know that is going to be there. And that's the purpose of, you know, my trip out. But in Yellowstone and with wildlife in general, you know, as a photographer, you want to be just like the animals that are here too, is you want to be opportunistic. It's like, you can go out and you can hunt and you could be unsuccessful. You know, I could go out and try to take pictures of bears for weeks and not see a single bear or not get the shot that I want. And then the one day that I'm just driving, like literally the other day, we were walking our dog in our backyard and there was a grizzly bear. Like we, you know, like, so you just never know
Right.
when you're going to come across wildlife and things like that. So, but like all the stuff that you see, like on the weekends, like when we're just out recreating,
Right.
you know, I'm not ever trying to go out and get some specific picture. It's like I let photography take a back, like take the back seat to us
Yeah.
actually living in the moment and having the experience. And then when I have my camera with me, I try to take the picture that represents like the experience that we had. I don't try to really like stage anything. Whereas if when I go to a national park, I've done details. So you know, I'm based in a park, but then I can, you know, get hired on to other parks like temporarily for like 2 or 3 weeks to help them with media projects that they have.
Right.
And if they want to document people doing a backpacking trip, or if we're shooting a, like, you know, a new backcountry video, then it's more of like a stage thing where we're like, hey, we have a plan and we have a shot list and we're going to go out and we're going to have people looking and doing said thing, because we want to make sure that we get the shots, because it's, you know, we're being paid and we want to make sure that we check the boxes and stuff like that. So
That makes sense. That's kind of a cool, you know, core and then satellite approach where you're getting like the stuff that they're paying you for, but then you can take all these like auxiliary images that are more interesting to you. And then also, I mean, to be honest, your friends and family that get to see it are extraordinarily interested in it as well.
yeah.
You've had work displayed all over the place. I've seen it online. I've seen it in magazines, and I noticed that you had work in Smithsonian installations. That had to have been kind of surreal. I mean, what was that like getting, you know, that news that you were going to be featured in a Smithsonian piece?
So I was actually in two different exhibits in the Smithsonian back-to-back years, which, so the first one was it was the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act of 1964. So wilderness is like with a capital W, is actually a specific public land designation that is one of the highest protections of land that you can have. And it, you know, kind of limits what you're allowed to do and how you can recreate in it and all those sorts of things.
Gotcha.
And when it was basically a contest that you submitted for, and so I put a bunch of photos in there, and then found out that I had been selected to be the basically the main photo for the exhibit. When you
Incredible.
like you walk into the exhibit, and the photo that I took was, you know, 20 feet wide by 5 feet high. It was like a big giant panorama on the wall, like as you walk into the exhibit. And then I had a couple smaller installations in the exhibit too. And when I found out, I mean, I was pumped. I mean, I was like, I can't believe it. This is crazy.
It's
And
surreal.
I was living in Montana at the time, and I told my mom, and she was pumped. And so my now wife, but we were just dating at the time, we made the decision like, hey, like, when the hell is this ever going to happen again? So we're all going to DC and we're going to go to the exhibit, and we're going to go check it out and you know, like take pictures. And Corey, who's my wife, she came with, and then I had some other friends and family meet us up there, and we all went to DC and had a great time, and it was super cool. And then the next year I found out that so the National Park Service the following year turned 100 years old, and I had found out that I had 3 photos in another exhibit that basically replaced that 1964 Wilderness Act exhibit. It was in the same space, and they just were going to put a new exhibit there.
Wow.
And I found out that I had 3 photos in that one, and that also I'd been selected for the main entrance photo. Again, yeah. So, but the cool thing this time was that because it was related to the National Park Service and not just like a general wilderness exhibit, was that they paid me, in addition to the exhibit itself, they scheduled like a presentation with some 2 other photographers that were in the exhibit for us to do like a panel discussion and a presentation.
Oh, wow.
And so they flew us out to DC, and we got to, you know, stay for the week and got like a behind the scenes tour of the exhibit, and you know, got to meet with the curators and everything. And then also got to do a presentation at the main interior building, where we just talked about photography and got to show like some of our favorite shots, and, you know, why we were interested in doing it. And it was, had the opportunity to be along. One of my coworkers, actually, he was selected in that exhibit also. And so we both got to fly out, and it was, it was kind of like lightning striking twice, back-to-back years. And it was just, again, really cool to be there and get to see it and get to meet all the other people that were a part of the exhibit. And
Wow.
the other like really fun thing was that I would get people that didn't know I was in an exhibit there, but I just had like a lot of friends that lived on the East Coast and would go up to DC, and because the Smithsonian museums are free, I'd get people like, they would walk in and then they would see this big giant photo, and then it says like photo by Jacob W. Frank, and they text me and they'd be like, dude, is this you? Like, you're in the Smithsonian? And I was like, yeah. And they're like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me? I was like,
incredible.
well, I mean,
that's a once in a lifetime thing, and you did it twice, back-to-back years. It's really, really incredible. So having worked in so many national parks all across the U.S., just continental U.S., but in Alaska and everything, you know, you have a background that most of us do not have. You know, the folks that are going about their day-to-day, picking up something from Starbucks, coming home and putting on Kardashians or something on the TV. What's something about the national parks that most folks don't know that you wish that they did know? Because I'm guessing you have a perspective on it that's different from ours. Is there something about our nation's National Park Service that you would like the listeners to know?
Well, a ton of stuff. But I'll give you some like good tips. Is like, I mean, the first thing that people don't realize, so national parks, there's 59 national parks, or 58 or 59. I think there's a new one in there. And a lot of people want to go to those like purebred national parks, but there's like 423 different units that are managed by the National Park Service across the country.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of people don't realize that there's units that are super close to their house that are not like a national park. So when you think about Florida, you're probably thinking Everglades, and, you know, maybe Dry Tortugas National Park, like out, you know, west of Key West. But, you know, in Sarasota, there's a national seashore or something like that that's managed by the National Park Service.
Interesting.
And what I've found by traveling around, like whenever we go, like wherever it is, like my wife and I just did a family reunion in San Diego, and whenever we go to a new place, the first thing I always do is go to nps.gov, which is, you know, the National Park Service's website.
Okay.
And I look and see if there's any national park units by where we're at. And so in San Diego, there's a place called San Cabrillo National Monument. And, you know, every time you go to a new national park, like, or a unit, whether it's like the, you know, titled national park or national seashore or national monument or whatever it may be, they're protecting like some cool story that's a part of, you know, U.S. history, or sometimes like that predates U.S. history.
Right.
Especially if you get out west, and if you get desert Southwest. There's places like Mesa Verde National Park, which, is one of the first national parks to protect cultural resources.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the ancestral Puebloans that were here, from 800 AD to 1200 AD, where there was like 400 years where they had a civilization. And when, maybe I don't remember it because I didn't really pay attention to history in school growing up, but I don't remember ever really learning about like native history or native lands or just about civilizations and stuff. And the National Park Service, like, granted, a lot of the lands, like the conversations that's coming out now is like a lot of these lands were, basically stolen from indigenous people that lived here before. They were like shoved off the land on the reservations. So, that's part of the National Park Service that, that conversation's happening right now, and they're grappling with what that means moving forward. And so, but on the other hand is like the National Park Service is exposing people to a lot of stories that they would not be exposed to otherwise. And so a lot of these small units that you may not, even know are there, you can go and, maybe you only spend like 2 or 3 hours there, but you learn some really interesting story. And the bar to become a national park is pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
Congress has to designate it. So there's not and there's different reasons for different parks and units and sizes, but it takes a consensus to realize like, hey, this is a special place and we need to protect it. And
Right.
so, I've been to, only about 25%. I think I've been to like 114 different National Park Service units now.
Okay.
And
Wow.
every time I've gone to them, I'm like, I walk away just going like, oh my God, I had no idea. Like, that is super cool. Like, whether it's in a city or whether it's like a big national park and it's just, breathtakingly beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
If you really want to go and see national parks, like, I get like being outside is one thing if you want to take pictures, but if you really just want to learn cool stories and interact with people who are really excited to tell you those stories, that's what the National Park Service does. And if you go on the website, you can basically find places that are in your backyard a lot of times, and you may not realize it.
Wow.
The other thing that I would mention is that, when you come to a place like Yellowstone, or you go to a place, like Yosemite or Grand Canyon, there's a lot of development around. And so people, and that's by design. Like, they want people to come out to these places and have, these amenities. But sometimes when you have those amenities around, you may not realize that they are still very wild places, and you can get hurt, and you can, you can do things that are going to hurt yourself, or you can do things that, you might end up having to make a bad decision in order to keep yourself safe. So like, if you say you go out hiking and it can be a perfectly beautiful day and everything's fine, and, you could twist your ankle, and because the weather's great, you're like, whatever, it's not that big of a deal. And you get out and everything's fine. But if the weather turns, because you're in the mountains, if you lose your way and you don't have cell service and you twist your ankle, it's like things compound very quickly.
Gotcha.
And so it's basically just all about being prepared and for whatever scenario it might be. And a lot of that is just like, very basic research, that before you go to a park, it's like, knowing your limits, and, not trying to do something that is not safe because you're trying to get a great picture or whatever. Like, there's a lot of people who injure themselves because they're trying to, get something for the gram.
Right.
And so, I mean, without like getting into, like super detailed specifics, is basically just like, before you go to a national park, is just plan ahead, like go to the website, find out what it is that you want to do. Every national park has different things. Like, some parks, hiking is probably the best thing to do when you're there, but then you could go to another park where there's not a lot of hiking trails, but you can get on a boat and you can go kayaking or canoeing or whatever. And
Cool.
So the more you research about what you want to do beforehand, the more likely you are to have a fun experience when you get there. Because the other thing is that the secret of national parks is out. I mean, people know about them, and they're getting busier and busier every year. And so the more that you plan ahead, and that you're going to have a place to sleep. If you plan ahead, you don't show up and maybe all the campgrounds are full, or all the hotels in the surrounding park are full. some parks you can't even drive the roads without a reservation now, like Rocky Mountain National Park or Glacier National Park. You can't even do like the main drives without a reservation ahead of time. So as things get busier and busier, you just have to plan ahead. Because I can't think of a more disappointing thing that you plan. You get on a plane or you travel out west on like a road trip and you get to the place that you want to be, and then you can't even do it because you don't have a reservation. That's a bummer.
Right. Well, that's huge. I had no idea that it had gotten that busy there where you need the reservation to make the drive in some places. And yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I also didn't think about what you said about, being prepared in terms of your own safety. So your enjoyment and safety depend on doing a little bit of research and, what do I need to be wearing and where do I need to be staying and all that kind of stuff ahead of time, and not just jump in the car and go. That's not going to work out for you necessarily. So,
Yeah. And I mean, and that's coming from a person who hates to plan. So I am very much the person that's like, I traveled when I graduated from grad school. I spent, a month backpacking through Europe with no agenda. And when we graduated undergrad with a bunch of friends, it was the same thing. And when I finished my first season in Montana at Glacier National Park, we did a 30-day road trip with no agenda. It was just like drive wherever we're going to go and figure it out. But cool. It was, 12 years ago when you could do that, and it wasn't as busy as it was now. So yeah, it's like that's
gotten so much busier.
Well, I think it's a combination of things. I think international travel's down right now, and people have been inside and been told to stay near their homes and not go out and do stuff for the last 18 months. And national parks are on the surface, being outside is a great idea. Like if you can be outside by yourself, like you don't have to wear a mask and you can get away from people, especially if you're coming from a big city.
Yeah.
But the issue is that a lot of the places that you come to in national parks are, designated overlooks, and there's parking lots, and you have 3,000 people watching a geyser eruption and like right next to you. So it's not always like
on each other.
Yeah. So it's not always that you're away from everybody, but in theory, there is a lot of space to spread out. And so people, I think it's that combination. I think it's the combination of the National Park Service celebrating its 100th birthday in 2016. Yeah. There was a really big campaign by the National Park Foundation called Find Your Park, and it was encouraging people to get out into their national parks. There's all this research about nature therapy, and just like being outside and the health benefits, of just general health benefits. And then on top of it, like the health benefits of not being in like crowded places, like with COVID and all that stuff. So I don't think it's any single thing. I think it's a combination of a bunch of things. And, I don't know how long it can sustain the way that it is. I think like once international travel starts to open back up again, I think people will start to, go other places. But
yeah, I think some people from other countries come to check us out. And so they, you might get an influx of people once that opens up a little bit more coming over here to check out national parks. It could go both ways.
Yeah. And that's true. I mean, and we still have like international visitors that come, and I would say it's down from what it's been in previous years. But yeah, I do the same. Like even when I travel internationally, if there's a national park that I can go and check out, I've been to national parks in Italy and France and Germany and Croatia. It's a really cool idea that, was started. The idea of national parks, of protected lands that's for everyone's consumption, not just for like a limited few, really started here in the United States, and the idea has exploded across the country. So Yellowstone is the world's first national park. And then the National Park Service here wasn't created until, so Yellowstone was 1872, and then the National Park Service was 1916. So we were like,
in that recent that the Park Service had been created. Kind of knew Yellowstone was the first, but I thought it was the first just here in the U.S. And this is all like mind blowing to me, and probably to the listener. What do you have a favorite? So it's hard to ask you if you have a favorite, because I'm sure it's like asking
Denali.
you to pick a
Denali.
favorite child.
Yeah, Denali National Park is my favorite in Alaska. And the things that I like to do, so the things that really kind of knock my socks off are mountains and lakes and wildflowers and just like big views. And there have been a few times in my life that, like, experiences that I've had where I've seen something that like truly was like inspiring or awesome, where it made me question my purpose as a human being. And
Right.
the first time that I saw the Grand Canyon, that was an experience where you're just like, it blows your mind, like how big the Grand Canyon is. Like watching a sunrise in the Grand Canyon is spectacular. The first time that I saw Denali, the mountain, so it's North America's tallest mountain, it's in Alaska. It's from the viewpoints, there's a variety of viewpoints that you can see around the state, but the mountain is so big you can see it from like 200 miles away. And the place that I first, it's basically 18,000 feet of relief, so you're viewing it, you're at like 2 feet above sea level, and then the mountain is over 20,000 feet tall, so it's just 18,000 feet from bottom to top. It's spectacular.
Wow.
And then the third one that I can remember off the top of my head, like an experience that really just blew me away, was seeing, it was in June of 2013. I went to Hawaii on the Big Island. My cousin got married, and going to Hawaii Volcanoes National Park. And there's a big giant volcano, Kilauea, that's active right now. It's erupting again. And there's a big crater that it glows into the night sky, so it looks like Mordor basically under the night sky, and the Milky Way was arching right over the top of it. And so getting to see like the night sky with just a freaking volcano, I mean, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just like like getting to see like that's geology happening right in front of you.
Yeah.
When you talk about geology in national parks, a lot of times it's in like millions of years old or billions of years old, how old this rock is. And getting to see like lava flow in front of you, you're like, that rock is like minutes old. Like, that's crazy to see that. So
your photography, I mean, are you, what's your approach to editing? Are you kind of like a heavy handed kind of thing, or are you kind of just bringing out some highlights and shadows here and there, but mostly just leaving the image as you took it? Like where do you lie on that spectrum?
Yeah, because I work for a government agency, and a lot of my work is I'm trying to accurately portray what people are seeing.
Right.
There are some techniques that when you do exposure technique to do like Milky Way stuff, it's brighter than what the human eye can see. And so I would say the majority of what you're seeing is, the style that I do is I'm trying to accurately represent what I saw.
That's pretty
and
cool.
So I would say the only thing that you really, I've seen Northern Lights that were so bright you could like read a book when it's pitch black at night. And so you only need to do like a half a second exposure for that. But when you're doing night sky photography, you're doing like really high ISO, so it's really sensitive to dark.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're doing like a really wide aperture, so you have a specialized lens, you have a specialized camera, and then you're also doing like 15 or 20 second exposure. So I would say that's probably the closest thing to, if you want to say that it's not very accurate to what the eye can see. But
no, but it's still what's there, though. You know what I mean? Like,
correct. Yeah. Like, I'm not like
is capturing something that you're not going to see necessarily with a naked eye, but you're also not adding anything digitally. You know what I mean? Like, you're not doing anything to the photo that's not accurate, like you said earlier.
Correct. Yeah. Like there's photo techniques where you can take multiple exposures and then you can blend the different photos together to get the different, things that you want out of it. And mainly, like I would say I don't have anything against that, but that's more of like an art form, whereas I feel like if you're trying to do photography, for the purposes that I do, again, like I'm not knocking and I'm not going to be like this purist or whatever. And I have buddies that do that style of photography, and it'll take them, it takes them 2 hours. They'll be sitting in one place for 2 hours, taking a lot of different pictures, waiting for the light to change. And then that takes them another 2 hours to edit the photo once they're done. I'm like, I don't have time for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. I'm more of a take lots of pictures and keep moving. And then afterwards pick the one that, as the light is changing, and just keep changing your angles and your composition, and then pick your favorite afterwards.
Well, your stuff's stunning. The night photography is probably what you're most famous for. My favorite stuff that you shoot is the wildlife stuff. Your Instagram is incredible, but can people find your prints and work?
You're just looking, if you just want to, check stuff out, I would say, Instagram form that I use to share my photos. And admittedly, now that we have a dog and I have less time to do more social media, I still take lots of pictures. I just don't share them as much as I probably should.
Your dog's incredible. The American Eskimo, right?
Yeah. So he's named. So you asked me my favorite national park, and it's Denali. 53 miles into the middle of that national park, along a river called the Toklat River, and that's where I met my wife. And my wife worked there for a long time. And our dog is named Toklat, and he's all white. Yeah. And the word Toklat is actually it's a Tanana Indian word. It's referring to the color of the water of the Toklat River, because it's melting from a glacier, so it's got like high turbidity, and so the water's kind of milky, cloudy white. And so we were like, we really love Alaska. Place like Toklat's my favorite place I've ever lived, and I've ever, I haven't been to a better place on the planet yet than there.
Wow.
And I realized that I'm a little biased because, I met my wife and all that kind of stuff there.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
Well, I hope people check you out. Your Instagram, I know you said you're not posting as much there, but what's the Instagram handle for people that want to check it out?
Yeah, it's Jacob W. Frank.
Jacob W. Frank. All right.
Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you want to share with the listeners?
No, just thanks for on. And I don't feel like I'm any special sort of a person or whatever, but I realize that I'm in a bubble surrounded by people who get to kind of live in cool places, and so I forget sometimes that the life that I lead and me and my wife lead is one of the ones that a lot of people are interested in doing, that type of thing. And so having the opportunity to talk about it and share it I appreciate it. And it's cool that people are willing to listen. And
absolutely. It's an honor to have you on, and definitely look forward to talking to you again soon. But yeah, I think a lot of people are going to be amazed at some of the stuff that you've captured through your camera lens. So thanks for everything.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for another episode of the Know It Some podcast. My thanks again to this week's guest, Jacob Frank. I learned a lot from your valuable expertise, and your time is extremely appreciated. Thanks for being on the show. Folks, if you have not done so already, please head on over to either Apple, iTunes, Podchaser. Leave us a 5-star ranking and review. Those rankings and reviews are extremely important because they help us to continue to book interesting guests each and every week. And the support so far has been incredible. Please keep it up. If you haven't done so, I could really use another ranking and review from you, the listener. Folks, another way to support the show would be to follow us on social media and like and share our posts with your friends. Folks, we are all over social media at Know It Some Pod. We are Know It Some Pod on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, you name it. We are there at Know It Some Pod. And you could always send us your feedback by sending us a DM there or by emailing us. Our address is knowitsomepod@gmail.com. Folks, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next week.